All right, I think our door is shut. I'll try to project as well as I can. We're recording for the cameras back there, but it is not outputting to the speakers that are in the corners of the room. I'm used to speaking to military crowds, so hopefully I'll be able to reach everyone in the back of the room. If it is not loud enough, please let me know. I'll bring it up a notch, okay? So my name is Bruce Hembree. I am Palo Alto Networks Cortex Security Architect for North, Central, and South America. I'll be talking to you today about automation, how it applies to what you do in your enterprise, and how it is used by threat actors currently on the internet to make your life miserable. Before I do this, I would like to acknowledge a debt that I have personally, and that debt is to a Canadian that is a very good thing. A long time ago, 3 guys got together and they created a band that was really important. This fellow just passed away, and he had a significant influence on making me a better person. So thank you to all Canadians. Yeah, that sucked. All right, so we're going to be talking about automation versus automation. As I mentioned, I am the security architect for the Americas. My background is in information systems warfare with the United States Air Force. Most relevant to what we're talking about here today, though, I was the security operations manager for the digital crimes unit at Microsoft. And what we did there was we worked with government agencies, law enforcement, and other entities around the world. We would identify an existential threat to the internet, and then through a series of legal and technical maneuvers, we would exploit the vulnerabilities in those networks to seize adversarial networks and shut them down. The things that I share with you today will be from the offensive perspective. Having worked with it for a long time now, I'm going to try to share with you the components that were the most useful and the components that were the most frustrating for us on the offensive side. So when you're trying to do solid work on the internet, whether it's in the defensive realm or the offensive realm, the idea is to be efficient, to do it well, and to make sure that your mission is accomplished. So automation is key to what we're going to talk about today. Why has automation become so critical? We are now at a point where you're trying to aggregate and defend a network that spans the globe. Endpoints that include your handsets, cloud instances, resources that may be on the other side of the planet from you. As humans, you are simply too slow. Offensively, we loved it when humans are in the loop. You're always going to be vulnerable to being exploited either through natural human nature or the fact that you are a human. You're going to get sick, you're going to want time off, you're going to have holidays. Offensively, we know where you live. We know what religion you are. We understand the predominant religions of your local area. We understand when you're going to be in the office, when you aren't going to be in the office, to make our mission more successful, a higher chance of it actually working. These things are critical to any mission being successful. So, the surface area that the average engineer has to defend now is too large for a human to keep up with it. Offensively, the things that we hated the most to see were organizations that were highly automated. Here's an example. The ZBot network botnet. We were only able to seize the click fraud component of it because of the degree of automation that they used. It made it more difficult to shut down. Citadel. Citadel had stolen $500 million in the 18 months prior to us taking it down. That is a botnet that's large enough to be listed on the NASDAQ. The resources that are built by these organized crime groups and nation-state actors are extremely valuable. They will go to whatever links necessary to maintain it. This includes automation. So, this is just average data, by the way. 174,000 alerts per week is what we're seeing internally at Palo Alto in an average customer. Frequently, they have over 30 products in their enterprise. Offensively, the more products you had, the more we liked it. Each product that you have in your enterprise creates a gap between itself and the next, because you have to learn it, you have to know it, you have to be trained on it. Each of them requires expense, and the knowledge gap between having 30 products or having 10 products produced is such that it makes it where any engineer trying to be proficient on 30 products is going to do a poor job. It's simply too difficult. Offensively, we want you to have all the products in the world. Stuff them, put them all in there. Each one produces a gap in your knowledge and the difficulty in keeping up with what you're doing inside your enterprise. Did you see that? 4 days? Average, 4 days to complete an investigation. Offensively, we understand most of the time we've only got a few hours to do the real work that happens inside of an operation. Whenever we were doing a takedown at the Digital Crimes Unit, it always involved synchronizing globally the takedown of that network in a single night. It has to happen instantly, and it has to be synchronized around the world. That's what you're up against. Threat actors that are designed and built by their nation states or the organized crime group that sponsors them to be good at what they do. It's their mission. For many threat actors, it's actually a patriotic act for them to do what they are doing. They're doing it for their homeland. This is real data from inside of Palo Alto Networks, 9 months. What I'm going to highlight here for you is, starting on the left-hand side, we're looking around 12 million samples of these different types of malware, specifically PowerShell through PDF. Look at the growth in 9 months to here. Almost 20,000, peaking over up to 21,000 samples in just a month. So look at the growth. What you're seeing here is not a 50% growth in threat actors. What you're looking at is them becoming better at automation. They are using automation against you. The number of threat actors hasn't changed that much. It's the way that they're leveraging automation to make sure that you cannot do your job. Also, real data from inside of Palo Alto Networks. At Palo Alto Networks, we built a thing called Wildfire. It is a custom sandbox that is designed to detect malware. Wildfire is specifically built to provide the entire BIOS extension set to a piece of malware and trick it into believing that it is running inside of a real machine. To do that, we had to give it the entire BIOS extension set and perform functions that are like a real machine. Traditionally, a VM has the ability to dynamically allocate RAM to itself, or I should say grab it. VM malware will look and see if the amount of RAM that's available can be expanded and say, wow, hey, a traditional machine can't do that. This is a good indicator that I'm running inside of a sandbox. The only thing we maintain control of is the CMOS clock, so that we can accelerate the malware through a million years. The idea is to make it execute if it's going to execute. We want to make sure that it is authentically provided with everything that it needs to understand that it's running inside of a real machine. What I'm trying to show you here is 12.1, almost 12.2 million samples actually tried to manipulate our sandbox. Malware that is advanced enough to try to make changes to the sandbox that it's running in, and this is accomplished through automation. They want to make sure that they're running inside of a real machine and do the volume that's required to expand the footprint of what they're doing to make their campaign succeed. 12.1 million, almost 12.2 million samples in 9 months. This is real data as well. 9 months, brand new samples of malware that had never been seen before. Let that sink in. malware that was brand new, had never been seen anywhere else in the world. What does it take to do this? What does it take to make over 50,000 brand new pieces in the course of a week? It takes automation. Without that functionality, you couldn't hit these numbers. This is what you're up against. Here's an interesting piece of data. This is one hash of Emotet in 9 minutes. Over 5,000 sessions. One hash. Is this a threat actor in his basement? No. This is automation being used actively against you. What does automation really do for you? It provides the healthy work-life balance that you need to be able to tolerate your job and respond in time through threat actors that are exploiting the fact that you're not at work, that you're out sick, that you are on holiday. All those things conspire to make their mission more successful. Automation allows you to do the side projects that you would never ever get a chance to actually accomplish. This is the kind of thing that will make you want to come to work because that level of pressure has been removed and the ability to do the side projects that you know are really important, things like 802.1x, things like SSL decrypt, all those things add up to becoming an effective security or enterprise security perimeter. Are there any questions, by the way? I've got some Starbucks cards for people that ask good questions. If your question sucks, no card. So, automation never gives up. It does its work even when you are not there. So, we have finally reached the point where machine learning and automation are creating a world where you don't have to always be hunted. You don't always have to be under the gun. I'm not trying to advocate or create a fear culture. What I'm advocating for is respect for an adversary, that it is their full-time job to understand you and find a way around you. If you create a fear culture in your enterprise, your users will hide things and they will make it harder to do your job. So we can now take and use machine learning to combine elements that are discretely benign, but in aggregate become malignant. That is really hard to do. I'll give you an example. This was not one of my operations, but it was one of the operations that the Digital Crimes Unit did. The Conficker botnet. Conficker was powered by DGA, an algorithm that builds the URLs used for command and control. Cracking that algorithm and using that information to take down Conficker was critical to that operation's success. But it took a lot of people and a lot of time to do it. Here's the contrast. Today, now, because of machine learning, our Palo Alto gear can detect DGA on the wire in 5 packets. Instead of taking weeks or months to tease something apart, it can now be done in 5 packets. That is machine learning. That's it seeing things and finding systems, relationships that you will never be able to see. It's powerful and it's an important tool in your arsenal. Make sure that you use it. Of the agencies that I've worked with, from the Secret Service to the FBI, Interpol, Scotland Yard, Australian Federal Police, the threat artifact database that's used at Palo Alto Networks is the largest single threat artifact database in the world. It is large enough that we can use semi-supervised learning. The bad thing about machine learning is it tends to discard outliers. Outliers are frequently extremely important data. We made sure we don't do that. 14 billion plus suspicious samples and over 7 trillion threat artifacts. This is how you give machine learning the resources it needs to understand things that aren't obvious to a human. We're simply too slow, and we don't have the capacity to add all these things together. All this data goes into building effective machine learning. The goal is to turn that into this. Everybody has a screen like what I showed you just a second ago. Somewhere in your enterprise there's one of these. This sucks. Nobody wants to look at this, nobody needs this, and it's no good for you. It's only hurting you. It's slowing you down and making it where you cannot find what you need to find. We never want you to look at this, ever. We want you to see that. At Palo Alto, we want you to have at most three incidents that you actually need to look at. 3 things that you actually need to say, yeah, this probably needs to be researched further. This needs to be looked at a little more in depth. Using machine learning and automation, we are reducing these alerts. We want to make sure that a human doesn't have to be there with their hand on the handle. The smaller you are, this may be controversial. In my opinion, the smaller you are, the more you need to rely on automation. There is a learning curve, there is a implementation curve associated with it, but once you get it in place, those human resources that are so constrained in a small environment become less critical, and you get to do the extra things that are important to you. The in-depth research. The smaller you are, the more you need automation. Every time a ticket comes in, anytime an incident comes in, it needs to be turned into a playbook that you don't have to touch it next time. Each time, make sure that it is the last time you have to touch a ticket like that. Put third-party stuff in there. Make sure that where we can ingest it, grab that third-party data, put it together, use the machine learning, leverage it. Make sure that it gets a chance to do things and see things that you can't see. So why does this matter? Correlation is really hard to do. Otherwise, it's just noise that makes you not want to work on what you're working on. How am I doing on time? Good. Yes?
How do you prevent false negatives, given that you also mentioned around outliers, and outliers are important? So how do you prevent it?
It's not easy. It's something, and learning to trust ML is challenging. The only way that you can really effectively do that is by continuing the training of the machine learning, making sure that it has an opportunity to learn the difference where we didn't necessarily know the difference ourselves. But yes, training is the only way to make that work. Let me give you a card. That one didn't suck.
Thank you. I have a question.
Sure.
So you talked about the discrete DTA being tracked within 5 packets.
Yes.
So you talked about the machine learning playing a huge role in determining that it's a 5-packet length.
Correct.
To determine DTA. So how much of it is a training component by humans to build that model versus unsupervised machine learning?
Unsupervised is less. It is very dependent on the volume of data that you give it, but the semi-supervised learning that we use allows us to make sure that in specific cases that we don't miss an outlier. I'm trying to answer your question efficiently. It's hard to say. The secret sauce inside of building a machine learning is probably one of the most closely guarded intellectual property items in the corporate world today. But yes, we do a good job.
So the truths that you're building for each organization will be different. So the same 5-packet, the same value proposition for a small company versus a large organization will be different. And the
potentially.
assets that you're going after would be different. So how do you determine if there's a model that we can tune to a certain organization's needs?
We have a learning period that we use internally for a specific network. So you install our systems, you put them in place, you let them learn for whatever time period you choose, but it needs at least 2 weeks to really learn things and understand how you function. The more time you can give it, the better. But you don't have to. It will still detect things that are anomalous, even in a network that's already infected, because anomalous behavior tends to be very similar. But yes, we do need a time period because every organization has their Super Bowl. Everyone has Patch Tuesday. Everyone has an event that happens once a year, once every month. Make sure you respecting those criteria is challenging, but it can be done. We do need a learning period. Another card.
Oh, thank you.
I've got a question that goes like a bit earlier in your talk. You were talking about Wildfire.
Yes.
So you mentioned like if host can increase its RAM, it could detect that it's running in a
VM,
right?
Yes.
What are some of the other examples of, like, if that's just one example of it? Like, can you elaborate? What are some of the other examples, as well as you mentioned you only control the CMOS clock?
Yes.
And how that cannot be detected by malware?
Applications that run inside of a workstation, unless they have an external time source, they don't understand the difference between 1 minute and 1 second. The CMOS clock lets them know what time it is and how much time has passed. So, short of the malware building a routine inside of itself where it's tracking how long it takes for something to execute, which is possible theoretically, that would be the primary obstacle to Wildfire functioning as we expect it to. But yes, other examples, Wildfire is a very deep well, and it would be best, if you want to know more about it, we've got other data that we need to go into. Okay. So yes, research it extensively, because it even does things like looking at the IP range where it should be sitting at. Is it a corporate resource? Is it on a 10.x network? Is it on a 192.168 network? All those things come into play, and it makes malware less likely or more likely to operate, to function as it should. All right, 2 cards left. All right, so why do we need all this automation? We're missing a whole bunch of people. Everybody knows about this. All these people that are missing from the cyber, I hate to use that term, let's call it the security industry. People that are missing from the security industry makes it difficult to find people that can do the job, are proficient at it, and are willing to do it for the price that you can afford to pay them. We're missing a lot of folks. Average salary for a CISSP, and this is just one certification. I'm going to pick on this one. There are lots of them, but this is just one that I'll pick on. Average salary in the United States, $120,000. These personnel are highly marketed to. They receive invitations from recruiters on the weekly, sometimes on the daily. If they hate their job, if they feel like they are always behind the 8 ball and under the gun, if they feel like they don't have the tools to succeed, they will move on. It all comes down to whether or not they feel like they have positive control, in the Air Force is the term we use, positive control of what you're trying to fly. Do you have positive control of the organization or the enterprise that you're trying to secure? Median time for a normal person to stay in their job is about 3.8 years. Through attrition or compromise, the average lifespan of a CISO is 17 months. From the time they take their job, they have a target on their back, and they're going to either lose through coordinated enemy action or through stress. Incidents of drug use, alcoholism, all of these things makes it very difficult to be a CISO. 17 months. For heavily recruited positions, such as a CISSP or CEH, GIAC, whatever your alphabet soup is, those personnel that are so highly recruited, their average tenure is 25% less than what I showed you earlier in the earlier slide, because they are so heavily recruited. LinkedIn is pinging them, ping, 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 ping. Hey, would you like to move on? When that person moves on, they take with them the institutional, tribal knowledge. They know where the bodies are buried. They take with them the training dollars that you have spent on them. They take with them all of the time that they have spent in the trenches with your organization, and they did it because their life sucked. They didn't want to be there. It was too much. 17 months for a CISO. So you got to move fast. Make it to where when you come to work, you have a chance. Don't always be suffering. So automation is the only effective way forward. Threat actors are they have been using the power of cloud instances to build new malware. This happens at Google, this happens at Amazon, this happened at Microsoft. A threat actor would use a stolen credit card to buy a cloud instance. And then they would use that cloud instance to build malware. Why would they do this? Because it subverts all your external data lists that you are currently using. It is coming, the malware that's being distributed is coming from an IP that is in the positive reputation space. Most companies trust Azure, Google Cloud, and AWS. You don't know what in your enterprise is running in there, and if you block it, you may inadvertently block something you shouldn't have. So they're building malware in a space that you inherently trust, most likely. There are a few organizations that do block some cloud providers. So they use these stolen identities to buy a cloud instance. They build malware in it, and now they are using a platform where they can globally distribute malware that no longer matches a hash because it's brand new. It's been salted so that it doesn't match, and it's from an IP positive space. Your EDLs, or external data lists, no longer matter. This positive reputation makes it extremely difficult to stop it. You've got to sandbox everything. It may have been built in the last 30 seconds. This is the power of automation. You're leveraging the cloud to build malware and distribute it globally at 40 gigabit per second. This automation is critical to a threat actor's success, and they will use whatever tools are necessary to make sure that a campaign succeeds. So you've neutralized a signature-based perimeter. Making sure that you're using sandboxing is critical. Sorry, I've gotten a little ahead of myself. So you can mitigate the urgency that you have to find and retain people the more automation you use. Offensively, we're using it as much as we can. Every place we have an opportunity, it is automated. Making sure that you don't have the time to actually respond to something well and thoroughly. So you now can find that signal within the noise. The automation of correlation of data between your edge and your endpoints is more than ever important because of things like TLS 1.3. Over half of malware is using encryption either for the initial infection vector, exfiltration of data, or command and control. Most of the time when I see an SSL decryption solution put in, the malware that we find is over 200 days old.
So the situation I've run across with respect to legitimate cloud sources being utilized for distribution of malware is that obviously credentials get leaked onto GitHub or whatever, so they just go on and grab all the keys from there and spin up whatever they want. And then on the flip side, I've had a situation with a certain developer vendor, Microsoft, who decided that they wanted to tell us that you should whitelist all of US West so we can send you data and so forth because they have no idea how to do natting. Where does automation fit in this in terms of like being able to scope out legitimate data that you are going to get from your poorly set up vendor, and then from the actual stuff that's a real threat? Like where is this step in that particular situation?
Automation can be used to do behavioral analysis of what's happening on the endpoint. That's a deep subject, and it's challenging because doing something about it efficiently is not easy. Behavioral analysis of what's actually happening at the endpoint, the way that it behaves on the endpoint, and trying to build rule sets associated with the way it's behaving is how I would try to do that. I think it's the only effective way to do it. The noise that's generated by a single endpoint can quickly overwhelm an analyst. But yes, it is automation and behavioral analysis of what's happening at the endpoint is critical for that function. Card? Got one left. In summary, trusting machine learning is not easy. Go ahead.
No, you don't have any good cards left. Oh, you got one. So my question was more around, you're talking about all this automation. I'm assuming you're coming from the perspective of Palo Alto's capabilities. You have the next-gen firewalls, and you have the proxy capabilities, and CASB built within. You've got the cloud sandbox functionality, and so on. There's a lot of other data points that need to be taken into account. So how's Palo Alto going to deal with that? Or are you talking about ingesting data from other sources? So in fact, are you talking about a SOAR? I'm trying to get clarity on that.
We do build an endpoint solution that helps us have end user or behavioral analytics for what's happening on the endpoint, and it's the only way that we've found that effectively gives us the behavior analysis that's critical for automation in that component. Here's a dirty secret. In next generation antivirus vendors, they are all within about 4 or 5% efficacy from each other. All of them, from the top to the bottom. It is that few percent that really cripples the users, or I should say the engineers that are trying to defend an environment. That those next-gen antivirus providers, they need to be able to do behavioral analytics on how something is working, what it's doing on the workstation or the server, see what it's trying to accomplish, and correlate that with what's happening on the edge at your firewall, and see how it's trying to interact with the internet at large. Combining those things. But yes, endpoint is the new sensor. I think in 10 years, I'd be surprised if firewalls in general aren't a commodity play that you just use as decryption and routing. Endpoint is where data really happens. And things like TLS 1.3 make that more challenging. But it's important to have. You've got to have that encryption. You've got to be a privacy advocate for your users, for your enterprise. But making sure that you have an opportunity to help defend them from themselves, especially like currently, I think it was over 60% of phishing sites are now encrypted. Just phishing sites. Most end users have been educated to believe if they see that lock in there in their browser, it's legit. It's good to go. Have I answered your question in some way?
Well, you basically said we've got to use your endpoint detection tool. So everyone wants to sell you their suite. That's
Yes.
not really the reality. People have what they have. You have to integrate with these things, right?
Somehow you've got to get that behavioral data off the endpoint. Even if you don't use us, use somebody.
So do you have a capability that supports that?
Yes.
Some sort of API?
Yes.
mechanism, or-
Yes, Palo Alto does build that. Any other questions? Okay, so trusting ML is not easy. The potential for false positives and false negatives will always be there. You've got to accept that. The power that it brings to an enterprise, it's hard to understate it. It's hard to overstate it. It can be the most effective thing in your enterprise, and it can also be the most annoying thing in your enterprise. If it provides you with more alerts than you really needed, what value does it have to you? Doing it well is a question of elegance, I guess is the best way to put it. Trusting ML is not easy. It does look like something out of a movie. I understand we're running close on time here. Benefits of using ML, the benefits of using automation. Automation is critical because it gives you that chance to respond to something without you actually being there. Making sure that you don't have to be in the loop with your finger on the button. Threat actors are counting on you not being there or being overwhelmed. Automation doesn't turn down alerts. It won't turn them off. And it doesn't get sick of looking at them. It will continue to function when you can't. Endpoints do become your new sensor. They become the canary in the coal mine. Use automation to take that data from them, build correlation and causality, and make sure that you have an opportunity to reduce the time to detection and your time to remediation. The longer an adversary has to sit in your network, the more fun they're going to have. I was party to an event that happened with a city where they were part of a campaign of 209 separate cities, and the malware that got into their network compromised them so thoroughly that they lost 911. They couldn't call for emergency services. They had to do their election with typewriters. Another network that was not, this city that was compromised was not a customer of ours, but their CIO was former Air Force, and he'd seen me present at a conference. He asked me to come up and help. Another customer of ours, or a customer of ours that was connected to their network, saw the malware trying to replicate through the county government and stopped it 8 days before the encryption event. They had seen this so many times, they didn't bother to tell the county that they were compromised. Over 1,100 workstations and servers, and now the people that live there, the trust factor is gone. Automation caught it and did something about it at the perimeter, and should always be used whenever you have an opportunity. I've got one card left. So move these things away from the engineers. They hate it. They don't want to see it, and they can't stand it. You're giving yourself an opportunity to keep the people that are already hard to get and are more likely to leave. From the offensive side, I'm telling you, use fewer tools. Be more effective with the ones that you do have.
When you're trying to ask a question up front.
Yeah, hi.
I'm sorry.
So understandably, we don't want our engineers to be spending so much time trying to mitigate with these tools, but inevitably at some point they will be required to come in and to validate how well it is working. How have you seen, what was the most elegant solution that you've seen in the way that engineers balance that validation versus investigation?
There are so many answers to this question. Honestly, I'd rather take it offline. It is difficult to do that. And having effective metrics for what you do is something that we are doing internally at Palo Alto. We're looking at how long it takes to respond to something, and collecting that data and having it make sense is hard for anyone. But the best I can tell you is the more effective your automation for incoming tickets, processing that ticket, and then documenting the finality of it, the better you will be off. And then looking at your original data, whether you have it in Splunk or ServiceNow or some other place where you're holding your ticket lifespan, and measuring that against over time is really going to be the only effective way to do that. But yes.
So I got a quick question. With
last one.
automation,
Sorry.
and for organizations that are resource limited,
Yes.
where would you say that they can start? Like, you can use open tools, or you can use Palo Alto or something very expensive, but within their network, where should they, if they have a limited amount of budget, should they go for what would you consider like an organization's jewels? Would it be like the DNS, start there, and then, or go right to the endpoints, spend your money?
Are you already doing SSL decrypt?
No.
Are you prohibited from using SSL decrypt because of privacy or union concerns? It's a valid concern. If you think about the way an encrypted session works, on the endpoint, all that data lives in memory. The endpoint, using your endpoint as a sensor, using that endpoint as a place to start doing your end user behavior analytics, is probably the place that I would start. I wouldn't go spend a giant pile of money on a firewall if I have an opportunity to do data collection at my endpoint via an agent. I wouldn't try to, someone at Palo Alto is probably going to be angry about this. Your firewall isn't going to be able to see most of the things that are really critical to be able to see because of your restriction on using SSL decrypt. Getting the intelligence off of your endpoints is going to be more valuable. So yes, I'm telling you right now, sorry boss, a firewall's not going to fix this. getting into the endpoint data and the way that the user or the application is behaving on the endpoint will be more valuable to you.
So what can you do with like some of the IoTs where you can't get into the endpoint?
IoT is ugly. IoT is messy. Frequently, these devices are poorly engineered and not maintained. Segregating them is one way of doing it.
Getting as many visibility points between those and doing UEBA on the network traffic is really where you're going to be able to secure those.
I agree. Trying to get them segregated off to their own network, watch the way that they behave. You can't put an endpoint, an agent on an IoT device. It doesn't exist. So looking at the way that they behave on the wire is going to be the most effective tool that you've got, and getting them segregated from users would be more important to me than anything else that I could do. Other questions? It is my privilege to get to speak to you. It is your time, it's your effort, it's your willingness to listen. All these things come together to create a security community that is tightly knit and willing to help each other. We are our best allies. Thank you very much for your time today.